So what's going to happen when Chinatowns start to disappear, and are they able to modernize while staying authentic? Let's talk about it.
I'm not gonna lie, I had to take it back into the studio because it is super cold outside. But anyways, what happens to Chinatowns as they disappear? Can they modernize while remaining authentic? Let's play some news clips.
For the 80-plus Chinatowns across America, including New York City's, after the pandemic hit hard here.
We lost a restaurant that was over 65 years old, a bakery that was almost 50 years old, these little mom and pop businesses which are struggling with rising rents, rising insurance, and the cost of their goods and food is increasing.
According to a study by Grace's nonprofit Welcome to Chinatown, between 2019 and 2021, visits to New York City's Chinatown fell by 50%.
With a lot of these Chinese restaurants and these Chinatown businesses, the margin between success and failure is really just sometimes as few as a couple dozen customers per week.
Even after the pandemic, visitation is still down.
New York City's Chinatown used to be open until 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. Nowadays, many restaurants are closed by 7:30 or 8.
Across the country, the Asian populations living in some of the most prominent Chinatowns declined between 1990 and 2020. But families are not giving up. Business owners like Alice are focused on the future, making changes to modernize, accepting credit cards, launching a website, getting the word out on social media.
Oh yeah, and it doesn't help that there's a huge mega jail being built in Manhattan's Chinatown too.
This is the jail scraper, and when completed, it'll rise higher than the Statue of Liberty and be the tallest correctional facility in the world. It's being built here, on the site of a notorious prison known anonymously as the Tombs. In a city full of controversial developments, this might just be public enemy number one.
Desperate calls from the community to stop construction of a brand new jail.
This is a real assault on our community.
And actually, it's not only New York's Chinatown, but also Philly's Chinatown and almost every other Chinatown that's going through something. So in this video, I'm going to go through some quick reasons why I think Chinatowns are struggling. Also, my predictions on what will happen as Chinatowns continue to change, morph, and partially disappear. But I don't want that to be too alarming because I got my own takes and my own opinions that will maybe help you feel better. But anyways, guys, stay tuned. Please hit that like button. Check out other episodes of the Hot Pot Boys. By the way, this is coming from someone like myself who has spent a lot of time in Chinatowns. I've seeked out a Chinatown in every city and country that I've been to. So I do care about these places, although I am not a native to, for example, Manhattan's Chinatown. I grew up going to Seattle's Chinatown. I've spent time in SF's Chinatown, LA's Chinatown. Obviously, I'm somewhat a part of Manhattan's Chinatown, which I'm very happy to be. But yeah, we're going to get into it. So real quick, reasons why Chinatowns are struggling. Let's just go through the reasons real quick. As they said in the video, rising rents, rising costs of insurance, rising labor costs. Okay, slim margins on plates of food. Guys, how much money do you think these people are making when they sell you a plate of handmade, freshly steamed xiaolongbao for $5, right? Also, landowners being capitalists and maybe slightly greedy, although it may be well within the system that we operate in. Number 4, safety concerns for employees at night. I know a lot of people, business owners, they close earlier after the pandemic because they're kind of scared for their employees, and their employees don't want to be leaving Chinatown at like 2 a.m. to go back to Brooklyn, for example. Another reason is old school owners who find it hard to adapt to new ways of business, and plus no younger generation to take up that family business. Obviously, as we know, a lot of these immigrant businesses, they're very hard to run, like we said, on low margins, and requires 12-hour workdays. And maybe, they didn't work that hard so that their kids just had to do the same job. They worked that hard so their kid could go be an accountant or a consultant and work in finance or whatever. Another reason is the elderly clientele of Chinatown isn't getting any younger, okay? And they're not multiplying, let's be honest. And many new Chinese are heading to the suburbs or other places to get Chinese food because getting good Chinese food, for example, is a lot easier and more accessible now than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So what might happen? Like, what are the predictions? are Chinatowns disappearing? I actually don't think they're disappearing. I don't think Manhattan's Chinatown is going to disappear. That's like a very strong word. That means disappear means that it's going to go poof, like it's going to go away. I actually think Chinatowns, in a way, are expanding. At least the Manhattan one, and I'm going to explain why, but it may not look the way that everybody thinks. So anyways, what might happen, a lot of legacy restaurants that are old school, like in the clip, that are 60 years old, are going to close down, and they're going to be either replaced by a second generation business or a modern Chinese chain or Asian chain business, from Asia, which we're starting to see, and I'll mention later. Number two, I think a lot of the second-gen Chinatown businesses that pop up will be started by second-generation Chinatown people, but they may be a little bit more expensive and a little bit more westernized. I mean, places like Potluck Club, Phoenix Palace, Jade and Clover, these are all started by people who grew up in Chinatown. But they're definitely not cheap eats, but they're very cool businesses. And I do think they add to the mosaic and they add to the different multi-generational variety that there is in Chinatown. But they're absolutely not cheap places. So I don't think people should expect that the new businesses are going to be just as cheap as the old businesses. I think another thing that will happen is that Chinatowns, for example, Manhattan's Chinatown, may follow a similar path to Little Italy and like what happened to the Italians, where Italians basically, they started in Little Italy and they moved to places like Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the Bronx, New Jersey, Staten Island. Funny enough, Bensonhurst is becoming very Chinese now. And I do think the internal community of Chinatown may start to fade a little bit just because the younger generations don't want to live there as much. I mean, there will be some people who still live there and operate there, but it just won't be as many, right? Because at the end of the day, you need the next generation to want to live and work in Chinatown. So if it is not livable and workable for the next generation, it will eventually, the internal community will start to kind of fade away. I don't want to say break down, but probably fade away slowly. This comment kind of put it together interestingly. This YouTube comment said, Chinatown is following the way of Little Italy. The Chinese will move to the suburbs like the Italians did, and then Chinatown will become a tourist spot, which it is already becoming. The Chinese in New York City used to depend on Chinatown to hook them up with employment, but that is no longer needed now that that's all being done online and through phone apps, probably such as WeChat. The relevance of Chinatown is becoming less and less as new immigrants depend on it less and less. The kids of the Chinese immigrants also got older and want to move to the outer boroughs or a nice suburb in Jersey or Long Island. That is definitely happening. So I do think the people who come back to Chinatown will make it more of a trip for nostalgia because there will be a little bit less of a need for Chinatown. But they will still come back for Chinese goods because it's not like there's not necessarily Chinese markets everywhere in the city. I do think Chinatowns will become even more of a vibey, kitschy place, kind of like Little Italy. Like, if you walk through Little Italy on a nice weekend, the lights and everybody, it does have even a different vibe than Chinatown, where it's very like romantic, I would say. And maybe that's just the Italian culture and their kind of branding that they have. And I don't know, maybe Chinatown becomes more romantic. Maybe Pell Street becomes more romantic. Doyer Street, a little bit more romantic. It is kind of romantic. I do think Chinatown will not necessarily become less Chinese, but specifically it will become less Cantonese, because if you guys know, the main group of Chinese who kind of, I guess, own the Chinatown narrative are Southern Chinese. Fujianese own part of it, but really it's Cantonese. It's really like based in Toisan Chinese, right? But I think that as more multinational Asian chains come into Chinatown, such as I.e HEYteA, which is from China, but they're like such a great, well-ran chain, to be honest, and it looks so nice, and people are going to love it as it just popped up in Chinatown. I mean, it's going to take some business away from the mom and pops, for sure, So let's get into the comment section. Subsequent waves of Chinese immigrants don't really need or want to fall into the Cantonese Southern-focused Chinatown. There are Chinese and other Asian enclaves in the suburbs, mirroring Asians moving out of cities and into suburbs. Basically that the new Chinese immigrants do not necessarily need to be in Chinatown as there was a strong need for Chinatown, as most of the immigrants were Cantonese, and that was the first and only place they could land. For 100 years, Chinatown was the spot that you had to start at first. But I just don't think it is that same place anymore 100 years later, which makes sense. It kind of makes sense that Chinatown is not needed for that reason. I think Chinatown will be needed for other reasons, but for that reason alone, it's definitely changing. Chinatown isn't necessarily going away completely. Many Chinese businesses have just moved in the suburbs and have created new Asian commercial clusters. Now, someone says, but the authenticity is gone of Chinatown. This is a big part. What does authenticity mean? I think it means something different to different people. I think if you're someone who's 50 years old, who grew up in Chinatown for your entire life in Manhattan's Chinatown, no doubt it feels less authentic. 100%. I agree. It even feels less authentic than it did 12 years ago, 11 years ago, the first time that I ever visited New York's Chinatown. And I think that, to be honest, authenticity, I think it's referring to, again, more Southern Chinese culture, particularly the Toisan. It definitely feels less of that, so, but is it still authentically Chinese? Chinatown's still pretty Chinese. Let's be honest. And all those new chains, all the new, even Chicha Sanchen, which is from Taiwan, that boba chain, they are all speaking Chinese, but they're not speaking Cantonese in there. They're speaking Mandarin probably. Another comment said Seattle had abandoned their Chinatown and International District to drug addicts. Just look at Little Saigon. They had to close the bus stops due to danger. Yes, Seattle's Chinatown and International District is terrible. The situation is bad. That's the Chinatown that I used to grow up going to. And I feel bad because, it's just, that one's tough, man. So, yeah, Chinatowns are, unfortunately, Chinatowns are usually a safer place for drug addicts and homeless people because Chinese people are generally not that violent towards them and that combative towards them. Chinese people will kind of let them be as long as they don't bother them. But ultimately, listen, addicts and homeless people, a lot of them are troubled people and mess with people of the Chinese community, obviously, as we know. Someone else said, as a Chinese American, I don't go to the old Chinatowns that often anymore. Finding a parking spot is always a challenge. I can easily get Asian stuff online at cheaper prices, and there are newer satellite Chinatowns with much more updated restaurants and grocery stores. Yeah, and this is coming from a Chinese American who probably grew up going to Chinatown quite a bit, but now doesn't want to deal with the hassle and the tourism. And like I said, you're going to go for nostalgia's sake because Chinatown is such a bustling place. It's not necessarily easy to get around, right? It's not easy to drive through. It's not easy to park in, but it does still have a charm to it. Someone else said, yeah, basically the Chinese who came in the past 40 years are not the same type of Southern Chinese that want to be in that community. And, just to say that because people are of Chinese descent, that they are somehow friends is actually wrong, in my opinion. I know that all Chinese would like to be grouped into one, or that we should all have Chinese community. I do think there is a larger sense of community amongst Chinese people, but there are different Chinese people. That's like saying, hey, how come this person's from Nebraska and this person's from Florida and they don't really get along? Or like this person's from New York City and this person's from New Mexico. How come they don't really get along? It's because it's literally different regions and there is different culture amongst Chinese. Someone said the Chinatown in Las Vegas is blowing up. Typical wait times, even midweek, can be up to 2 hours at many locations. New restaurants and store openings are happening monthly. Yes, someone else said Las Vegas Chinatown is honestly the biggest Chinatown I've ever been to. It's unlike any other, and more Asian Americans are moving from California to Nevada and leaving California, and therefore growing Las Vegas Chinatown. Hey, Las Vegas Chinatown, that is a new Chinatown that is still growing. Versus everybody is always talking about other Chinatowns that are being depleted. But yeah, I think, again, Manhattan's Chinatown is still here to stay for a while, but it is going to be changing. As you can see in this news article, a lot of Chinese from California are moving to Nevada. So I guess, can Chinatowns modernize to fit the future without losing its authenticity? Or is it inevitable? Let me just say this. And this is my overall conclusion on all this. let me be very Chinese for a second and see things through the lens of like 100 years. Because if you guys know, like Chinese people or China with such a long history, they look at things through a longer lens. Chinese people have always been a people of the diaspora. For at least 500-600 years, Chinese people in large numbers have left the mainland and gone to other places for commerce and community and to set up shop, right? Namely Southeast Asia for hundreds of years. And then they've been going all across the world for at least 200 years. And I guess like it continues to this day. So Chinatowns, if you look at it as just a landing spot for a lot of Chinese, of course they're going to migrate to other places when they can. And of course the Chinatown community or whatever it is, it's going to morph because the new Chinese are not necessarily Cantonese and they don't necessarily identify with Chinatown. And again, you used to come to Chinatown to seek employment, to kind of break your way into America, but you don't need to anymore. You can go to Flushing. And Flushing, in a way, is even a larger Chinatown than Manhattan's Chinatown. It's actually a bigger Chinese community. It's huge. I mean, Main Street and Roosevelt Ave, that place literally feels like a bustling Shanghai of like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you know? So I guess like there's always Chinese people coming into America, but they're just not going to be Cantonese. So I think that's going to change the identity of Chinatown eventually, as there's going to be more Mandarin-speaking businesses in Chinatown. So I don't think Chinatown's going to get less Chinese. Again, I think it is going to get less of a particular Chinese, and I mean particularly Southern Chinese, which obviously is the main original kind of like Chinatown narrative, which is kind of what Chinatown is known for. So I guess it'll change. And not to take away from anything, but like I think everybody, all types of people are feeling like their homes are changing nowadays. So in this globalization, like people are moving so much and there's so many immigrants. Like if you think about it, Italians in Bensonhurst, they feel like they're getting displaced by Chinese. Chinese in Manhattan feel like they're getting displaced by what, hipsters, or they're just getting gentrified. So I guess everybody has something to say about their home, you know, that's been around for a long time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, if you feel like Chinatown is going away or losing its authenticity, that's a common experience for a lot of people. I mean, you could talk to white people all across this nation. Obviously, they feel like their way of life is changing too, or else we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. So I think everybody across the board is feeling like the life that they knew 30 years ago is not going to be the same. And in a way, it's true. I guess my hope for Chinatown is that the businesses will modernize, and I do think the strong businesses will survive. I still think there's always going to be some Chinatown cheap eats. I do think there's going to be more second-generation businesses that pop up that are cooler, more for the kind of Americanized crowd or Asian American, that third culture crowd, as I said. But they're not necessarily going to be cheap because, listen, the cheapest businesses are going to be started by immigrants, probably, to be honest. That's, you know, working class immigrants. That's going to be the people who are going to provide the Chinatown cheap eats, which is a defining factor of Manhattan's Chinatown, by the way. So I think those are going to be around for decades. But I do think some of the legacy businesses are going to close. But not every business is meant to be open for 70 years. Like, if you had a 50-year-old business, that's a good run, to be honest. Like, that's a great run. So I don't think there's any shame in closing shop, you know, and I just think that, you know, in 30 years, the businesses that have been around for 20 years, they're going to be the 50-year-old businesses. You know, 50 years from now, the brand new businesses today are going to be the 50-year-old businesses that are going to have to close down in 50 years. So I think that Chinese people have always been migrating to different places. They've always been a people of the diaspora. They've always been moving around. They've been leaving China for centuries. So why aren't they going to leave Chinatown at some point? And that's just what it is. But I think that there's a sense of pride, and shout out to all the organizations that are helping businesses modernize. I hope that the good businesses do modernize and stick around. But you know, I think the strong will survive in Chinatown. So anyways, guys, that's my overall take. I'm probably going to go to Fuzhou and get some dollar dumplings in Chinatown today, but after doing this video, I'm thinking about it. So support your Chinatown as long as possible, but also look forward to the new businesses. And there's going to be a lot of cool Chinese chains that are opening up. They might take up some space for the mom and pops. Unfortunately, this is a capitalistic society, and that kind of happens, if I had to be honest. But anyways, hopefully you found this video helpful and this perspective helpful and hopeful in a way. So Chinatowns will still be around. It's just changing. Again, they might even be expanding. Chinese people ain't going away. In a way, New York is only becoming more Chinese, if I had to say overall. New York is becoming more Chinese, but it may not be needing Chinatown in the same way. And you may not need Chinatown to stay the same way like it used to. So anyways, please hit that like button. Check out other episodes of the Hot Pot Boys. And until next time, we out. Peace.